Hold it, hold it, hold it. There's much more to the DeLorean Motor Company than Doc's 88-mile-an-hour time machine in Back to the Future. It's a story of a playboy founder with a meteoric rise, a story of hope and regeneration in an area torn apart after a decade of fighting, and of a cocaine smuggling fall from grace. Yes, this story has it all. This is the DeLorean Story. John DeLorean was born in Detroit to parents who both had auto industry connections, as did almost everyone in Detroit at that time. He was seen as a creative and innovative engineer, designing the concealed windscreen wiper and windscreen embedded radio aerial. By the age of 40, he was the youngest divisional head of General Motors and was heralded as the driving force behind the Pontiac GTO. He soon became known for his sharp dress style and corporate rebel image, and by 1970 was running GM's Chevrolet division, being seen with high-profile celebrities like Sammy Davis Jr. and Johnny Carson. He turned both Pontiac and Chevrolet around, with Chevrolet becoming the first car division to sell 3 million cars a year in 1971, and in 1972 was made GM Vice President. It seemed to be just a matter of time before he became President of General Motors. However, with his rebellious image, other executives had their knives out, despite the fact that he was still producing stellar business results. He was leaving work on Thursday evening in the General Motors Company jet for Los Angeles, partying until Monday evening and turning up to work on Tuesday morning. In 1973, he announced his surprise departure from General Motors, and some suggested he'd been fired. Regardless, he suddenly became sharply critical of his old company, telling how he felt his ideas had been ignored in a 1979 expose book on A Clear Day You Can See General Motors. It's easy to see this as sour grapes, but prior to his departure he'd butted heads with General Motors management on not producing enough small cars when foreign cars from VW and Japan were eating into their market, and on General Motors' reluctance to make cleaner cars. In 1972 he'd made an internal speech to General Motors on product quality where he said, "Poor quality threatens to destroy us. Every defect, every recall only diminishes the credibility of whatever amount of advertising we do. Poor quality has already resulted in seriously declining owner loyalty and reduced credibility to our promises to do better next time." Some would say these words are as true today as they were in 1972. Later that year, John DeLorean announced the formation of a new car company, a bold move from a larger-than-life figure, and mirroring Elon Musk and Tesla 30 years later. Work started on the company's first effort, a two-seater sports car. The goal was to create a premium car that could take on BMW and Mercedes, with the first car being a BMW CS killer. He approached Ital Design in 1974 and specifically Giorgetto Giugiaro to design it. DeLorean specified the car had to have gull-wing doors, a mid-engine layout, room for larger people like John DeLorean, who was over 6 foot, and a stainless steel exterior, so the car would last and last. It was to use radically different technologies, a mid-engine Wankel rotary engine and an experimental elastic reservoir moulding process for the chassis. But when the NSU Citroën-derived Wankel engine was cancelled, DeLorean looked at the Cologne V6, used by many European Fords in the 1970s, before finally settling on the PRV V6 engine, created as a joint effort between Volvo, Renault and Peugeot and used in the Volvo 260. But this meant the engine had to move to the rear of the car, which compromised handling and meant the only rear storage was the space behind the seats. He founded the DeLorean Motor Company in 1975, getting investments from financial institutions, plus his celebrity friends Johnny Carson and Sammy Davis Jr. He also encouraged dealerships to fund themselves by offering them DeLorean Motor Company shares as incentives. John DeLorean was a charmer, and he talked up his new company that would take on Europe and Detroit's finest. A prototype DSV-1 for DeLorean's safety vehicle was built by 1977 and was used to generate further financing to take the car to production. But the elastic reservoir moulding process proved to be impossible to perfect, and DeLorean asked Colin Chapman at Lotus Cars to help them construct a chassis. By this time the DSV-1 had become the DSV-12 and finally the DMC-12 for DeLorean Motor Company. Given the limited time frame, Lotus used the tried and tested central steel backbone designed for the Lotus Esprit. A fiberglass body was attached before adding the stainless steel outer panels. The large steel backbone meant a large central column down the middle of the car between the driver and the passenger. This design was a big change from the original DSV-1 vision, and there were disagreements between Lotus and DeLorean's chief engineer Bill Collins, DeLorean's friend from his GM days. But DeLorean wanted the car produced quickly before his funding ran out, so taking what was essentially a Lotus Esprit chassis and reworking it for the DeLorean really was the only option. The car also used the Lotus Esprit suspension and steering, giving it a good ride and handling. And the beautiful Giugiaro styling made it through the redesign mostly unscathed. Today, businesses looking to employ large numbers of workers lobby cities and governments for incentive packages. A prime example was Amazon's auctioning of its second base in 2018, and Boeing got many incentives from South Carolina to build its second 787 assembly plant there. DeLorean did the same for his new car company, discussing terms with the Republic of Ireland and Puerto Rico, but he ended up taking a deal to build his factory in Northern Ireland. This area was in dire economic straits after sectarian violence had erupted in 1970. Between those who wanted the country to keep close ties with the UK and those who wanted Northern Ireland to be a part of a larger island. The UK Labour government offered to pay for $120 million of the $200 million startup costs of the business, despite the Industrial Development Board for Northern Ireland telling the government there was only a 1 in 10 chance the DeLorean Motor Company would even succeed. Construction of the factory on the outskirts of Belfast began in 1978, and a management and logistics centre opened in Coventry in England to help source parts. Production was scheduled to begin in 1979, but it quickly became clear that there were major quality issues with production. Despite being a hard-working and willing workforce, many of the Belfast workers had never had a job, let alone assemble cars, and this meant lots of production problems and delays. Building a factory where none of the workers had experience building your product was a high-risk strategy. But DeLorean had little choice given he needed the UK government's financing. And DeLorean wasn't hands-on getting production issues fixed, remaining mostly in New York working on financing and dealer contracts. Contrast this to Elon Musk, who was working all day and sleeping at the Tesla factory at night when the Model 3 production problems threatened the survival of his company. Development of the DeLorean continued in parallel to initial production, such was the rush nature of the car. The DMC-12 was luxurious, with leather seats, air conditioning, power locks and mirrors, a tilt and telescopic steering wheel and tinted glass. Fueling was done by a small flap on the bonnet. That was seen as ugly, so on later models the flap was removed, so you had to lift the bonnet to fuel the car. On a transatlantic flight, DeLorean was chatting to a fellow passenger who was surprised that his new luxury car didn't have electric windows, so these were hurriedly added. As the windows couldn't be retracted into such a small door, small windows within windows were used. The UK government had been assured production would start in May 1980, with 30,000 cars rolling off the production line in 1981, but it would take until December until production began, with the first car rolling off the production line in January 1981. Production issues remained. All cars would be sold in North America, and once they reached American shores they had to be checked for problems such as large panel gaps, and then these would have to be fixed. These production problems would soon be solved at the Belfast factory, and quality quickly improved. To help drum up sales, DeLorean took out a print ad in the American Express magazine for his new car, now simply called the DeLorean. It would be available exclusively to Gold Card members as a special limited edition version covered entirely in 24-karat gold for $85,000. That's over $250,000 in 2020, and a lot more than the standard price of $25,000. Despite DeLorean limiting production to 100 cars, only 3 were ever made. Exchange rate issues between the US and UK could have thwarted sales, with the exchange rate reaching as high as $2.44 to the pound in 1980. But in 1981 the rates dropped below $2 to the pound, which at the time were quite favourable. Reviewers were wowed by the styling, with its amazing gull-wing doors. It truly was an aspirational car, but some people had problems reaching to close the gull-wing doors once they got into it, and DeLorean fitted integrated extension pull straps. Early models included an 80-amp alternator that couldn't meet the power draw when all the electrical items were on, leading to some cars with dead batteries. An updated Motorola 90-amp alternator was quickly fitted. With a high ride height and large rear engine hanging off the back, the handling was inevitably going to be compromised. The weight distribution was 35% at the front, 65% at the rear. That large PRV V6 engine also lacked performance, with US safety emissions regulations stifling the engine's 130 horsepower output. And to cap it all, it wasn't that cheap compared to the competition. With the car lacking power, DeLorean looked for a solution. Lotus had boosted the 4-cylinder Esprit with a turbo in 1981, and DeLorean followed suit, adding 4 turbos to produce a smooth power curve. It produced an impressive 0 to 60 time of 5.8 seconds compared to the original car's time of 8.8 seconds, and the plan was to offer it for the 1984 model car. But the DeLorean Motor Company was in trouble. By the end of 1981, sales were faltering, and it didn't help that US automotive sales were in a depression. Break-even had been estimated between 10 and 20,000 cars, but only 6,000 had been sold. DeLorean's finances were dependent on good sales, and with the new conservative government unwilling to throw good money after bad, John DeLorean found his company in dire straits. By January 1982, workers were down to 3 working days a week. Plans were put in place to get the DeLorean approved for sale in Europe and to float the company on the stock market, but by February it was all over. The receivers were called in and the company was temporarily restructured pending a miracle. John DeLorean believed the UK government would come to his aid to help stop a catastrophic job loss in an area with little investment and continuing sectarian violence. But they were only willing to finance the company if equal funds could be found from private investors, and this was looking increasingly unlikely. Various other DeLorean concepts had been produced when the company's future was looking rosier. The DMC-24 would have been a 4-seat version of the DMC-12. Italdesign made a mock-up, but the bill was never paid, and they used it as the basis for the Lamborghini Marco Polo. The DMC-44 would have been an off-road utility vehicle, with both off-road and on-road variants. The DMC-80 would have been a small bus. But these were dreams of a company in happier days when DeLorean was going to go toe-to-toe with his old company General Motors. With the restructuring of DeLorean, one idea that nearly came off was a deal with British Leyland. The TR7 and TR8 had recently ended production, and the DeLorean Motor Company suggested that they take the tooling and produce versions of these cars at the Northern Ireland plant. Financial backing was agreed and BL was open to the idea, but then the whole idea came crashing down in a hotel room in Los Angeles. John DeLorean was desperate to keep his car company alive, and when people are desperate, they do desperate things. He was approached by a neighbour about bankrolling a cocaine smuggling operation, but unbeknownst to John DeLorean, this was an FBI sting operation. The LA hotel room meeting was captured on videotape, and DeLorean was charged on October 1982. Any hopes of restarting the company died at that moment, and although DeLorean was acquitted, with the operation seen as entrapment, his company was dead and his reputation forever tarnished. Almost 9,000 cars were eventually produced, and it became famous when it was used as a time-travelling DeLorean in the greatest film of all time, Back to the Future in 1985. Okay, I may be a little biased. It sparked a renewed interest in the DeLorean, and several have been converted to look just like the car from the film, flux capacitor and all. When the company folded, there were parts to make several thousand more cars. The stock was eventually purchased by the Liverpool-born Stephen Wynn, who founded the DeLorean Motor Company in Humble, Texas, and they restore original DeLoreans to this day. They've tried to jump through the legal hoops to manufacture new ones and get them on American roads, including an electric version. They also offer turbo kits and engine swaps, with the Cadillac Northstar engine from the Cadillac DeVille being a popular option. The company even has the original component drawings and prides itself that it can recreate parts that are no longer available. The DeLorean failed not because it was a terrible car or because it wasn't developed correctly. John DeLorean generally made pragmatic design decisions to get his car to market. It wasn't the best value car or the best in its class, but it had a wow factor, and plenty of other cars have sold well on that fact alone. The DeLorean failed mainly due to financing. Funding a new car is a major undertaking, and a lot needed to go right for the company to survive. With a downturn in car demand in the early 1980s and numbers that just didn't add up, it was a matter of time before the company folded. There are many parallels between DeLorean and Tesla, but Tesla minimized the outlay of their initial capital. They purchased a car body and running gear, again working with Lotus, and licensed the propulsion system from AC Propulsion. All Tesla initially planned to bring to the table was the ability to get thousands of standard laptop batteries working together and integrate everything into one package. And even then the company came close to bankruptcy not once, but twice. Yes, the DeLorean used an outsourced engine and semi-customized chassis, but in the end John DeLorean just bit off more than he could chew. Learn about the history of the London Bridge and why it was a nightmare to cross either over or under it on my new sister channel Little Car. And if you want to help either channel, please subscribe or think about becoming a Patreon for just $1 or 80p a month. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.